All right, so this is Kalii's two teams he feels like are going to be in a national championship.
Yeah, so Oregon and Georgia. Now, just a little side note, I had Georgia beating Penn State and Texas on their way here, and Oregon beating USC, Florida State, and Ohio State on the road here. And yeah, both the semifinal games were rematches of my picks for the Big Ten. Actually, no, not the Big Ten. For the SEC championship game. Forgot I had USC in there for the Big Ten. But arguably the two best teams from the Big Ten facing off in what was a rematch. I had Oregon getting the better of them this time. And yes, I do have Georgia beating Texas 3 times this season. I had Georgia beating Texas in the regular season. I had Georgia beating Texas in the SEC championship game. And in the semifinals of the playoffs. I know that's kind of crazy. I don't know why
I keep thinking Oklahoma is the opponent that Georgia's playing. I don't know why I keep thinking that.
Yeah, no Oklahoma. I'm not too high on them this year. But I mean, this matchup is probably going to be one of the more difficult ones because these are two super talented rosters. It's really both teams' strengths match up with one another's. I mean, the first thing you think of with, at least that I think of with Georgia, is going to be their front lines, the offensive and defensive line, which, this defensive line of Georgia generally can't be stopped by many opposition offensive lines, but Oregon has 2 elite offensive tackles in Josh Connerly and a Johnny Cornelius. This is one of the few offensive lines in the country that can really hold their own against this Georgia front 7 to protect Dillon Gabriel and set up this passing offense. Again, Georgia stacked on defense. Malachi Starks back there on the back end, going to be holding things down, right? So, on that end, like Oregon's offense, in my opinion, is probably going to struggle because this Georgia defense is very, very stout. But then on the flip side, right? We don't really know what Georgia's passing game is going to look like without Brock Bowers, right? You have developing talent at wide receiver. If Rara Thomas isn't in legal trouble, right? Especially with Dominic Lovett, hopefully taking another step forward.
Yep.
The passing offense it'll be at least less focused on one guy, right? The targets should be more evenly distributed, at least in theory. But then the running game, right? That's another thing you think of with all those running backs, Etienne and both Branson and Roderick Robinson. Like, again, an excellent running game, but Oregon's defense only allowed like 104 rushing yards per game last year, which I think was top 10 in the country. So they had an elite rushing defense. So it's strength on strength really across the board. And so in terms of matchups, man, it's a tough one.
I just had to throw it up.
That is true. If there's a couple suspensions here, this one could easily go for Oregon, right? But
they'll still play the next day. It doesn't matter.
Oh yeah, they'll just be suspended, next year for their one cupcake game. But for me, this matchup is going to come down to experience. I trust, as much as I love Dillon Gabriel and the talent that he is, I think as a quarterback in terms of pure talent, like what can they do, the throws, what can they make, and even like how dynamic are they in the running game? Gabriel has that edge over Beck, and in my opinion, it's not even close. But I do trust Beck to manage the game well. He's experienced in big games, and holistically, I love Dan Lanning. I love the guy. Great coach. But Kirby Smart is one of the few coaches in the country right now who I would trust to outcoach him as well. I think Georgia barely beats Oregon in a very close national championship game. Again, on paper, it's splitting hairs, right? But I got to give Georgia the edge because of their experience. I know that they lost to Alabama last year, but Georgia, I think as a whole, I think they're going to have a slight edge over Oregon.
Ooh, man, I can't disagree with you with either one of these two. Now, spoiler alert on the chat, all of us have different national championship winners. You might see a couple of these teams the same and there are two, but all of us are different, which is great. But I can't disagree with you, man. I think the only person that was high on Carson Beck was Don. if I remember right. Let me go to the Heisman spreadsheet. Yeah, he has he was the only one that had Carson Beck and Jackson Dart in his Heisman 4. I mean, is what it is. Like, if Carson Beck puts it all together, we saw flashes from him last year. Some people just thought he played incredible last year. And I don't think that was the case. I think him and Quinn Ewers' years was so similar to me.
Yeah, no, you look at the numbers, like, I had this conversation with people I know. They're like, man, Quinn Ewers is so inconsistent, which isn't necessarily false. But then they're like, man, Carson Beck's so reliable, yada, yada. I'm like, man, if you look at the numbers, Carson Beck's highs may have been at times like right around where Quinn Ewers' highs were. But Beck had way lower lows last season. So if you want to talk about consistency, you can make a case for Quinn Ewers being more consistent this past year.
And he had the best weapon in the country on his team.
Yeah, I mean, look, I know that might be a hot take, but like, go crunch the numbers yourselves. Look at the individual games, because you'll see games where Beck really did nothing. Like Quinn Ewers threw at least one touchdown pass in every game he played, I believe. Beck, you can't say the same this past year. So, it's one of those things where, yeah, the numbers speak for themselves there. Again, I like Beck as a game manager. I don't think he's a game breaker. While I think Gabriel is, I think that Georgia defense will be able to neutralize him.
Yep. Yeah, I like this, man. And if this happens, this is literally on paper, to me, outside of Ohio State. These are I think Georgia, Oregon, and Ohio State are the 3 best teams on paper.
Yeah.
So if you have either one of those, I can't holistically disagree with you and who that winner is going to be.
Right there with you, man.